Welcome to our latest charity webinar, which is co-hosted by Kingston Smith and Quilter Cheviot. In this session, we will be exploring what is being done to tackle climate change and what the role of the circular economy plays in effective climate action. By way of introduction, my name is Charles Mesquita. I'm a Charities Director at Quilter Cheviot and a proud trustee of RL Glassball, Bowel Research UK and Prism the Gift Fund. I'm joined by our regular panelist, James Saunders, who's a charity partner at Kingston Smith, a specialist audit partner advising charities and educational institutions. He is also a trustee of Med Supply Drive, a governor of Rose Hill School, and non-executive of Reach 2, a multi-academy trust. We also have Greg Kearney, who is a senior responsible investment analyst at Quilter Cheviot. A significant part of Greg's work is engaging with companies to better understand how they assess environmental, social and governance risks, as well as opportunities. Greg joined Quilters in 2019 from the UN, supported Principle of Responsible Investment. So welcome, Greg. And then last but certainly not least, we've got Mael Arribas from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, who joined them in 2020 as a research analyst in plastic initiatives, having previously studied business studies at ESSEN in France. And for those of you who don't know much about Ellen MacArthur Foundation, I would certainly recommend going and have a look at their website. There's some fantastic information on there. I'm not going to try and explain what circular economy is, because I'm going to leave that to Mael later. But one quote I did pick up from the website from Ellen herself, which I think sort of sets the scene quite nicely, which at sea, what you have is all you have. Stopping en route to restock, so there's no convenience stores, is just not an option, and therefore careful resource management can be a matter of life and death. And for her, she began to see the world was not that different as a result of it, and we'll come on to that a little bit later. And then just sort of finally from me, I have to say that as a trustee, I'm finding the whole thing around climate change and what we should be doing as organizations is a sort of a key part of a conversation. In fact, I raised it at a board meeting, which was triggered much to do with the COP26 last year. And with some intrepidation, I wasn't quite sure what reaction we get, but actually what happened is that everybody was having similar thoughts that we should be doing something, and we've now put it as a key part of our strategic review, which happened to be doing this year, which will be quite interesting. We might come on to a little bit about that a little bit later. But enough from me. Perhaps the good place to start, Greg, is around regulation and what is going on. And it would appear that investment seems to be leading a lot of what's happening. So perhaps you might be able to just share of where we've come from and where we're going to.
Yeah, you're right. There's a lot going on in this space. I think expectations have been changing from regulators and clients as well, but I think the general public in terms of those that developing expectations in this area. And I think most investment managers and probably investors more broadly are trying to react accordingly to that. So I won't go into too much the kind of finer detail of the legal documents, because I don't think they're always prime time podcast viewing. But from a regulatory perspective, there's loads going on, and I can give a couple of examples of the changes and frameworks that are prompting climate action and meaningful climate action, particularly from our perspective and things that are taking up a lot of our time. And a lot of those are to do with transparency, which I think is key, and disclosures. So in the UK, TCFD, the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, is a really important development, and that's essentially an annual reporting framework on disclosures. And as a large UK registered company, the government now requires Quilter PLC to report on this annually. So the first stage of this TCFD reporting requires disclosure of your carbon footprinting at a portfolio level, alongside a multitude of other disclosures related to scenario analysis on physical and transitional risks, as well as the governance of climate risk. So how that kind of starts at the board level and filters down. And then next year, we'll probably be required to disclose our medium-term carbon reduction targets within that reporting. And I'd expect that to expand to a net zero style target. And when I talk about net zero, I'm really talking about limiting global temperature increases to 1.5 degrees by 2050. So a target aligned with that in terms of your investments. And then if we kind of pivot slightly in terms of geographical focus in the EU, again, there's a lot going on. And that's really under this umbrella of their action plan on sustainable finance. There's lots of kind of buckets of legislation that's fit under there. But I'd say more specifically, the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation, known as SFDR, means that investment managers will have to meet mandatory ESG disclosure requirements. And this is interesting because it relates not only to metrics on how environmental and social matters affect your investments, but also how your investments affect environmental and social matters. So it's both sides of the coin, and it's almost got a bit of an impact focus on that as well. And like TCFD, really, this is going to start with those large listed companies, and that's going to be first and foremost who has to report initially on these. But I'd say within the EU, another key piece of legislation is the EU taxonomy, and this will establish a classification system or a framework intended to provide businesses and investors with a common language to identify what degree an economic activity can be considered environmentally sustainable. And really the idea for this is it makes it easier for investors to understand how green a portfolio is or how green a fund is with a common benchmark, because I think that's not always transparent at the moment. But I think generally speaking, you see regulatory expectations and requirements becoming much more robust. And I think this increased transparency and these requirements mean that organizations are really having to kind of sit down and put pen to paper when it comes to meaningful climate action and meaningful plans that come through. So that's a snapshot, an overview of what's going on there.
And just slightly supplementary question is, I suppose it'll come as a bit of a surprise to some, but it would appear that Europe's leading the way with this and we're having to follow.
Yeah, so Europe, I think the EU really, when it comes to sustainable finance regulation, is in many ways kind of the leading light in terms of putting these things forward. So particularly mandatory requirements on ESG, disclosure of ESG metrics, and this idea of this taxonomy that creates a definitional basis for what green is and what sustainable is. That said, the UK are doing quite a lot as well. Obviously, there's a little bit of divergence with kind of exiting the European Union. And I would say the UK is still kind of putting into place what they will do, but I think it'll be largely led by the framework around what the EU have done already in terms of a taxonomy, in terms of disclosure requirements. But that said, the UK are pretty important in moving this legislation forward in a kind of pre-Brexit era. So we're quite on board with what's happening, and we're quite au fait with the direction that's going on.
So I suppose a bit like sort of GDPR and data protection, where Europe has sort of set the I suppose the standards. But what about the US? I mean, that's sort of the largest market. What are they doing?
Yeah, so I think, and this goes more, is relevant more globally as well. The EU, I think everybody's looking to the EU in terms of what they're doing, and I think it will set the standards around the world. And I think potentially even for the US, I think the US are at a bit of a later starting point. I think given the political direction of previous administrations, there was generally a more of a philosophical pushback on the idea of integrating ESG analysis into investment processes in general. And there was a big pushback from SEC requirements looking to say, actually, you can consider these environmental, social and governance issues in investment analysis. That was a huge pushback from the previous administration. So they've just begun to accept that you can put these things in place. So I'd say that's a good degree behind what Europe's been doing for a while. And they're also now looking at putting in a version of their own taxonomy. So creating that definitional basis, which will probably be led by the EU, but I imagine there will be North American, US specificness around that as well.
Brilliant, thank you. And James, I think that sort of leads quite neatly on to financial reporting. What's happening with financial reporting?
Well, the situation at the moment is relatively limited and simple, really, for such a fast-moving and complex matter that is subject to so many interested parties and so many regulators. Actually, what you need to do now, what trustees and directors need to put in their accounts, is very, very limited, really. It's broken down into three areas. There's required specific disclosures. There is the impact to be reported in the directors or trustees reports as a whole, in the narrative section at the front of sets of accounts. And then there's the impact on numbers towards the back, which is generally quite limited. But on the first point, the required specific disclosures, a lot of people will be familiar with mandatory greenhouse gases reporting, streamlined energy and carbon reporting is the term, SECR. brought in from 2019. It's for large companies. And that's not the largest companies. Greg was talking about some of the disclosures that Quilter needs to make. That's more than most of our audience, I think, would be familiar with. Most of our audience might be familiar with SECR, £36 million turnover company, £80 million balance sheet, 250 employees. So it catches, maybe some of our audience. Relatively new still, a review of SECR reporting was undertaken in 2021. The actual content is very limited. It is a bit of a boilerplate, a few numbers on greenhouse gas reporting, that sort of thing. Nothing too complex, and very rarely goes to more than a page, really. So it is limited right now. Trustees and directors are encouraged to write in their trustees report any risks to their organisation. So there's a narrative section which everyone should be considering, and that's twofold. Greg alluded to it earlier. There is the impact of the organisation on the environment, and the impact of the climate change discussion and the evolution of the climate change situation on the entity itself. So it comes at it from both ways, really. That's what people should be considering. And then the third area is really about impact on the numbers. Are there any particular estimates or judgments or longer term impacts on the numbers that ought to be included in the accounts? We've seen very limited elements of that so far. It will come in more as financial reporting regulations pick up on trying to put values on risks and challenges in the future. But for the moment, there was an FRC thematic review on climate change 2020. It said, understandably, boards have more responsibility and have a responsibility to do more, to consider the impact of their organisations and the impact of the environmental challenges on their organisations, to look at the resilience of your business model in the light of climate change and climate change challenges. And look at the future, current and future challenges that are on both sides. So the FRC knows that this needs to be done. It's just at the moment there is very little in terms of regulation that actually impacts. So yeah, I mean, other than that, it's really down to the individual entities to work out how much beyond the bare minimum they ought to or want to disclose or talk about in their trustees. What charities, as we know, historically very good at this sort of thing, ahead of the curve compared to their corporate equivalents, and I'm sure it's on the agenda of every board, of every charity in the land, really. But the regulations have got to catch up, and they are. But we'll come back to exactly how they are moving so rapidly in a little time.
Yeah, I think we'll come back to this. I think this is a really interesting, because we are certainly seeing a lot of charities raise it from an investment perspective about ESG. I mean, it's invariably every single time we're getting asked by prospective clients and clients. Mael, I think this leads on very neatly to you, and just a simple question is, what is the circular economy?
So before diving into what is the circular economy, let me just look at what is our current system. So our current economic model is what we call a linear economy. So in this economy, we take resources out of the ground, we make products out of them. So it can be phones, clothes, plastic products we all use. And then when we don't longer want them or need them, we dispose them, we throw them away. So it's one straight line, one linear consumption model. At the foundation, we also call it the take, make, waste model. So this model dominates today's economy, but it's hugely wasteful. So I think it's important to acknowledge that along the way, efficiency of this model has increased, and it brought some benefits, lifting millions, if not billions of people out of poverty, but we're still facing the same problem. We are using finite resources and we are harming the planet in the process. Just to give you some example, to illustrate what our current system look like, we found that in Europe, on average, a car spends 92% of its life parked or just unused. If we look at the textile industry, every second, the equivalent of one garbage truck of textile is landfilled or burned. So we're just losing these resources. And if we look a bit more at climate change, we found that nearly half, to be exact, 45% of the emission that cause climate change come from the way we make and use products and food. And we all know that these emissions are projected to grow fast, along with rising demands for materials and growing global population. So that's our current system. So what is the alternative? Of course, we need to change, and we need to change for circular economy. But what do we mean by that, and what is it? At the foundation, we describe the circular economy as a system solution framework that aims to create long-term economic growth in a ways that it tackles as well global challenges such as climate change, biodiversity loss, waste, and pollution. So the circular economy is based on 3 principles, and they are all driven by design. So the first one is that we need to eliminate waste and pollution. And what is important to understand is that this waste and pollution are not accidents, but they are the results of the way we design products, the way we deliver services. So by redesigning them and keeping the circular economy in mind at the design stage, we can avoid creating waste and pollution in the first place, rather than trying to clean up the problem more downstream of the value chain. That was the first pillar. The second principle is that we need to circulate products and materials with the idea and the aim of keeping them in the economy at the highest possible value for as long as possible. So how can we do that? By redesigning components, products, so we can reuse them, manufacture them, and ensure they have several life cycle and are not just thrown away after one short life cycle. And the last principle is to regenerate nature, because in nature, the concept of waste does not exist. Everything is food for something else. So to take an example, when a leaf falls off a tree, it decomposes and releases its nutrients into the soil, back to the soil. So it's something, this nature system is what we take inspiration from at the foundation. So just to summarize, the circular economy tackles climate change and other challenges such as biodiversity loss in scalable way that create value, economic growth, and job, but also increase the resilience of supply chain to the effect of climate change.
Sounds absolutely amazing. It also sounds very simple. So why aren't we doing it?
Indeed, it sounds simple, but it's definitely not easy to transition our current model and economy. When the foundation was created more than 10 years ago, the idea of a circular economy was just emerging. So I think the first step we had to do is to create awareness, present the idea to the world, and convince businesses it was the right direction to go towards, and not only businesses, but also governments and other organizations. And this is how, for example, we convinced some of our first partners like Renault to join us 10 years ago and become a pioneer of this circular economy. Now, 10 years later, it's a well-known idea, and its potential is now widely understood. So we have mobilized a strong network around us, including businesses and investment funds, BlackRock, Danone, Renault, Google, IKEA, and many more. Also governments, we have the cities of São Paulo, London, and New York City in our network. So we can build on that for this transition. But what is sure is that achieving a circular economy takes time and require collaboration across the board. Just to give you an example, when we look at the plastic industry, reuse models appear to be an easy idea to replace single-use packaging. But when looking at the implementation, implementing reuse model has to rethink not only the product, but also the business model that is around it and the way you deliver value to your consumers. So it's a massive change that requires cross-chain collaboration to make it happen in practice. So if we look at the system more broadly, what we need today is action from a lot of different actors. We need international institutions to put the circular economy on the international climate and economic agendas. We just talk about governments and regulation. We need policymakers to incorporate the circular economy in their policies, including in climate change strategies. Of course, besides that, we need businesses to integrate this idea in their strategy and investors to mobilize the capital we need towards circular economy investments. And we also in academia and other non-profit organizations to stimulate research and create knowledge around this topic.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? Because I mean, you've only got to walk around a supermarket, haven't you, and just look at the amount of plastic that's wrapped around everything you buy, and how difficult it is to tell of what is recyclable and what's not. And you would have thought that's a relatively simple thing to sort out, so that you could actually make it into a circular economy. Just on the sort of on the regulation side, James, sort of on the financial reporting, how do you, I mean, trustees are obviously need to be aware of what's going on. They don't need to do anything at the moment, from what you've just said. How do you think that's going to change going forward?
Yeah, and that's a big question, really. I mean, just on the UK government published a policy paper October last year, Greening Finance, a roadmap to sustainable investing. And then Bayes produced a statutory instrument about climate-related financial disclosures, which is only relevant to the biggest listed organisations, really. But it did signal, I think, that commitment to that net zero greenhouse gas emissions of by 2015, which the government is still committing to. So that's the first, I think, new bit of regulation around this sort of thing. April 2022 it starts, period commencing April 22, so the reporting will be in 2023. But it does show that these things are starting to come through. So my comments earlier about there's nothing in place at the moment, it's starting to evolve. I mean, more interesting, when just preparing for this, I was doing a little bit of looking around exactly what is going on in the international stage in particular. And I learned something new. International, sorry, excuse me for a second. The International Sustainability Standards Board presented to something called the International Forum of Accounting Standards Setters. So there was this group set up recently, a meeting, I think in March, earlier this month. So they had 4 presentations at the forum. One was from the ISSB, the second was from the Project Task Force on European Sustainability Reporting Standards, which was part of EFRAG, the European Financial Reporting Advisory Group. Then there was a third presentation from the Australian Accounting Standards Board, and then a fourth presentation from the Korean Accounting Standards Board. So there's an awful lot of presentations from different parties. Obviously all have their own purposes, agenda, all that sort of thing. And it was striking how many different parties are involved in this. You know, the UK government, Greg sort of mentioned earlier, the UK government intends to incorporate any European and global sustainability strategies into its own strategy and standards into its own regulatory framework. So that will take care of itself, I think. And there is that, you know, intention and keenness to do so. But there must be concerns about, you know, the amount of consultation documents that are going to be in play here, potentially stretching the ability of those preparing accounts or financial statements or to make these documents relevant, to make sure that they are catching all the relevant regulations they need to, especially if you're a multinational or cross-border organization of some sort, and how useful the result will be of these. You know, if you've got a set of accounts or financial statements or any sort of other documentation which is heavily regulated and is subject to so many different regulations, I mean, how relevant is it going to be to investors and to the users of these accounts, to you know, to beneficiaries in our world, to funders? You know, it has the potential to be a real muddle, I think. All these different organisations are going at different speeds. They have, as I say, as I mentioned, different agendas maybe. There are different stages. So convergence and harmonisation of all this further down the line is going to be extremely difficult. And it made me smile actually at one point, because one of the results of the forum meeting, one of the responses to having all of these groups presenting and all these different organisations involved is that they wanted to set up a new group to try and bring all of these groups together. So they're actually adding in another level of review or consolidation, if you like, which may or may not work. So there is an awful lot there going on at the moment. I think we're in danger of going from very little to little right now to, I mean, who knows what in a few years' time, and it being a very confusing environment for most people.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think there's always that danger, isn't there? Greg, I think that leads on very neatly, I think, to you about, how do you engage with companies? Because that'll sort of, I suppose, feed back into what James has been talking about, and how are they responding to these sorts of questions?
Yeah, so I think in terms of how we engage with companies, there's many different ways that we can do it. I think we kind of put our types of engagements into three broad buckets. So we have our reactive engagements, where we're reacting to controversies, or usually around AGMs where there's something come up we're not particularly happy with, perhaps a remuneration policy that we've got issues with. And then we have these thematic style engagements, which I think probably fit a bit more into this climate change discussion, and where we have identified key risks and key themes that we want to engage the company with. We'll use our various different kind of ESG data sources that we have available, and some of the reporting that is provided by companies on greenhouse gas emissions to identify the worst performers in that area. And we'll systematically engage with them on what they're doing, how they're managing and mitigating those risks when it comes to climate change, and what their climate transition plans look like. So those are kind of in-depth conversations we're having. You can imagine the conversations we're having recently, particularly on that climate theme, are mainly with oil and gas majors, diversified miners. So it's similar kind of industries where a lot of these emissions are held. And then I guess in terms of the kind of measuring and monitoring of progress over that, this can be the tricky bit. We obviously have the usual tracking tools for measuring the kind of status of a current engagement, and whether that's a fancy Excel spreadsheet, or we do have some external platforms we can use. But I think it is important to point out, and not to overpromise on this, that the results are not always obvious. It can be difficult to accurately measure those progress, and change in practice can stem from multiple conversations over multiple years sometimes, and also you've got multiple investors engaging on the same subject with a company, so it can be difficult to pinpoint which conversation nudged them towards that tipping point in terms of changing behavior. So attributable outcomes, I think, can sometimes be more obvious. I think it tends to happen particularly in companies, investment trusts and funds where those holdings are quite sizable, where you own a decent amount of the company, or they've clearly flagged to you that, your conversation made us change this. That happens occasionally. And I think despite the difficulties in kind of claiming those bragging rights as an individual investor, which I think people want to do, engagement outcomes are tangible. And I think when investors undertake that dialogue with investee holdings, whether that's individually or sometimes in collaboration with other investors, which we join collaborative engagements, you can see that investor-led change happening. I think that can be seen in the nearly 40% of FTSE 100 board positions that are now held by women, and that was around 12.5% 10 years ago. So that's changed. And also there's been a proliferation of these company net zero commitments, and then that's growing as well. And I think a lot of that can be attributed to investor engagement. So for us, it's a constant, it's an ongoing process, but it lies at the core of our approach to investing responsibly. So stewardship's the kind of foundation in which we start with.
I suppose the key is being realistic about the time frame of which change happens, and also the amount of engagement that coming in from different directions, which will influence. And I assume it's quite easy to gauge whether a company is just talking the talk or sort of walking the walk rather than talking the talk. Is that
I think it can be difficult. I think what we are finding some investors doing, and I kind of understand this to a certain extent, because it's a relatively nascent process that's taking place using environmental, social and governance factors in investment analysis. But you do see some people relying perhaps a bit more on third-party data methodologies when it comes to ESG. So, but ESG analysis, so perhaps like an ESG overall rating that might be relied upon. And I think sometimes that can be a little bit harder to get through, a little bit murkier in terms of different third parties will have different third-party methodologies. You'll see Tesla be given an A by one ratings provider and a D by another ratings provider based upon the methodologies and weightings they using and the piece of information they have. So for me, that's where stewardship and active ownership is key, because it's not a one-off process. It's a constant dialogue that evolves. And I think really it's hard to supplement that sitting in front of a company and asking those detailed questions that are perhaps a bit hard to answer, engage in the reaction and the preparedness for those answers that they're giving, and continuing that conversation to see how it progresses over time. I think it's really the best way of measuring these things.
And Charles, to your point about walking the walk and talking the talk, I mean, we've seen P&O Ferries do something dastardly this week with their employees. I had a look on their website, and this isn't necessarily an investment point, but an investor's point, but they on their website they've got, we are committed to our people, we are we're a people first employer, or whatever their buzz phrase is on there, and so talking the talk and walking what completely different in their case, having seen what they've done. I mean, that's why I think, Greg, we do know that a lot of these investment managers do go and interview companies and don't just look at their website and see what they say in their corporate brochures. There is that much more in-depth analysis of what an ESG policy or whatever policy they say they put on their website. Can they substantiate it?
I think that's a really interesting point, isn't it? And leads on to sorry, a question I was going to ask you a little bit later, Greg, but in fact I'll ask you now, is around divest and engage, because I think with P&O, which is owned by DB World, which is effectively a private company, it doesn't have shareholders that is going to make any noise. So do you want to just explain a little bit around about the merits of divesting versus engagement, or engagement versus divestment?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. And also I think, seeing companies moving into privately held ownership as well, I think can be an interesting point around stewardship. But I guess divestment is the more straightforward option. Perhaps it is the best option for an investor who knows they're unlikely to have any kind of meaningful dialogue or engagement with the company, and it may be better to pass on a holding to an investor who may engage, but they might also not engage. You might fall into private hands, which you could be selling to somebody who has no consideration for the potential environmental or, in P&O's case, social impact. What's going on. So there's a risk there. I think we view divestment as kind of the final escalation step in that stewardship process. But firstly, engagement for information, and then engagement for change is the starting point of everything. We really don't want to get to that final escalation point, and we want to try everything in between that. I think particularly when it comes to engagement and investor engagement, is particularly successful when we advocate for adherence to kind of common standards or frameworks, whether that's being a signatory to the Principles for Responsible Investment, or encouraging executive pay to be linked to the various ESG metrics or net zero plans that they're putting in place, or demanding a kind of pathway to net zero, which is a commonly understood framework. Because we can't necessarily dictate the finer points in how a company should operate. And I think ultimately, they should be the experts in the finer points of how it should operate and what they need to change to get to this point. But I think the role of an active owner is really to share the examples of best practice you've had with other conversations with other companies in the same industry, or potentially other industries, and just to really encourage the companies to work within those best practice frameworks, and to do that transparently with the disclosures attached to that as well. So yes, it's complicated, it's nuanced. I think success isn't always easily manageable, but I think change often comes about through that stakeholder, shareholder dialogue rather than divestment outcomes. And that makes it harder when it does fall into private ownership as well.
We've certainly heard a lot of charities that were divesting because of, and I think people are coming to the realization that engagement probably or possibly is a more effective route. I mean, I was reading the other day in The Economist that something like $60 billion in the last 2 years of fossil fuel related businesses have moved from public ownership to private equity. where you've completed. Mael, just on with your relationships that the foundation has with businesses, so Renault you've talked about and IKEA, how do you, one, engage with them, and secondly, how do you actually, I suppose, monitor that they're making progressive, making progression in the area that you're looking to have that engagement with?
Yeah, so I would say the circular economy sounds like a simple idea, but it's as well very broad, and there is always this question, where do I start? So at the foundation, we took different industries and materials and try to look at them and really try to catalyze change within one industry. So today we have 4 initiatives that we call the systemic initiative. So we have fashion, finance, plastics, and food we look at. And so maybe let's go into the plastic one, because I'm working for the plastics initiative, so it's the one I know best. So how do we engage with company on this topic? So we have 3 programs, and in particular back in 2018 we launched the Global Commitment in collaboration with the UN Environment Program. And this Global Commitment unites businesses, governments, and other organizations behind a common vision of a circular economy for plastics. And in order to achieve this vision, our signatories, and in particular more than 250 businesses, have committed to a set of 2025 targets. This includes reaching 100% of reusable, recyclable, or compostable plastic packaging by 2025, but also increase their use of recycled content into plastic packaging and reduce their use of total and virgin plastic packaging. So it's what they've committed for, but as we said, it's important to measure if these companies are talking talk or walking the walk. So they're also committed, and what's important is they're committed to report annually on the progress made against these targets. So we publish every year around November an annual report where we describe the progress made by the group against the target. We also have some sector insights where we outline a bit more the progress within a particular sector and the best practices, so in food, fashion, cosmetics, and many others. And we also publish on our website individual company data with the progress they've made since the launch of the initiative. So by publishing this information, we aim to ensure transparency against the commitment made in that area. And all this information is out there to be used by media, but we also talk about investor engagement. So we hope this is a base as well for this engagement process. And we've been talking as well with this industry to push the use of our content. So that was for the Global Commitment, and we have 2 other programs in the Plastic Initiative, the Plastic Pact, where we engage with them more on a local basis. So the Plastic Pact is a network of national and regional initiative that brings together key stakeholders in the given geography to implement solution toward the circular economy for plastic. So it's really tailored to each industry, each geography, sorry, in order to ensure as well we have local relevant solution. And the last program we have is the innovation program, where we look at different topics that needs to be addressed in order to achieve the circular economy for plastic. So 2 years ago, we looked at upstream innovation, and we tried to demonstrate feasibility of different new solution, such as reuse solution, and inspire other organizations to look into it. And recently we looked at flexible packaging. That is important. There is an important issue, and we look at the different pathway that could exist to achieve a circular economy for plastic, for this type of material. So by creating all these resources as well and gathering knowledge, we aim to help our network to achieving their strategies. So that was for plastic, but as I said, we have other initiatives where we have similar processes and similar programs for fashion and food. So in short, I would say we actively engage with our network to foster collaboration, enable knowledge exchange within that network, but we also try to push them to report as transparently as possible on their progress made and towards their strategy.
Brilliant, thank you. That's really, really helpful. Sorry, James, are you going to ask something? Yeah.
Can I ask Mael? I mean, bearing in mind, a lot of our audience is expected to be sort of charity trustees and management teams. How, if any of this rings with them, how do they engage with you? What's the best way to sort of get in touch with the foundation, or see if there are those sort of synergies, if you like, or potential for working together?
So we have endorsers are part of our programs that can be many different organizations, including charities. So, for example, in the context of the global commitment, and we do have a community platform where we engage with this type of organization as well. And I would say, yeah, sharing our content and exploring our content is the best way to engage with what we do. And of course, when we're publishing as well all this data about company, we hope that some other organization in the field are going to pick it up for their work and feed into their work as well.
Brilliant, thank you. And I suppose sort of to my last question to all three of you, James, I'm going to start with you as the first on this, but what should trustees be doing about this, and where should they start?
Yes, okay. I think, Charles, I'd go back to what we've often talked about on these webinars, on this sort of series, and it's driven through a lot of what we've discussed. It's going back to strategy, and it's tying it in with culture. So you go back to your strategy for your organisation. Whoever's watching this, if you're a charity trustee or a manager or whoever you are, if you're in charge of some organisation, is this part of your strategy? Is the challenge of climate change, is the circular economy or some derivation of of an approach to the challenges? Is this in your charity or organisation strategy at the moment? If not, why not? But and then what does that fall out into? Is it a commitment to? Is it an aspiration? Is it an aim? Where does it fall? And then how does that fit in with the culture of the organisation? Are your people on board with this strategy, whatever it is? Does the strategy fall through into operations? Does it fall through into your procurement policies? I mean, we, as a firm, we work extensively in the charity sector. More and more now, we're getting questions. I think, Charles, you mentioned it earlier. We're getting questions about, do our values and do our approaches to supply chains fit in with the charity that we are being invited to engage with? So there is that extension of values into people you work with, and making sure that the whole environment is in line with your objectives and your values, not just your own organisation. So there it is. Strategy and culture. Is it evolving with what we've talked about today, the changing regulations, the changing approach, the very fast-paced changes in global outlook on climate change? And are you up to date with things like evolution, like the circular economy and things like that? Are you on top of this?
Greg, what about you? I suppose you'll talk about it much more from a client engaging with an investment manager.
Yeah, I think also I'm not a trustee, so I'm sure there's lots of things I'm forgetting here, but I guess it's probably echoing James in many ways. Are there any areas of climate change that relate directly to the organisations? Could you implement a carbon reduction plan or support associated initiatives or companies to do a similar thing? And with investments, I think supporting those managers who are active owners and will seek a transition to a lower carbon economy through company interactions, and they have a well-established process there, I think is a good place to start, definitely.
Brilliant. And last but not least, Mael?
Yes, I think I'm gonna echo as well what James and Greg said, but yeah, I think it's important to as a trustee to encourage organization to set circular economy strategy and even targets if it's relevant, encourage them to take action in line with the vision for a circular economy, and we were talking about how to engage with the foundation as a charity. As I said, we have endorsers in many of our programs, and it's important to signal alignment with the vision as well, and signal that it's the right direction to go towards. And I think as well, use our resources to understand what is already happening in different industries, and hopefully take inspiration in our network about what's going on and what could be applied to your own organization.
Brilliant. Well, I'd just like to thank Mael, James, and Greg for a really fascinating talk, and for sharing their views. I have to say the sort of the takeaways from me were, from a trustee's perspective, that this really needs to sit in the strategy and within the culture of the organisation, and be part of the overall sort of ethics of the organisation. I love this concept of going away from the sort of the take, make, and waste economy. I think that is so important, how much. And also, Greg, you mentioned about engagement, the power of engagement, and the move over the last 10 years from women on board from being 12% to 40%. So actually having a voice and voicing it, and making sure people are aware of what you require, or what you want, and what your aspirations are, is important, because if you don't and remain silent, then things won't happen. So thank you very much.